and there's so much in this book. It's so layered, that's what makes it the sort of lifelong companion for me. Is that every time you read it, there are more layers and even more things that you figure out, like big things in the plot. I was like, oh, I've read this book 3 times and I didn't understand what happened until the fourth time.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Without These Books. I'm your host, Allison Roach. Without These Books is a thank you inspired video podcast that celebrates the authors, books, and characters that changed us as writers, readers, and as people. So, today on our show, I'll be joined by Jennifer Acker. She is the founder and editor-in-chief of The Common and author of the debut novel, The Limits of the World, a fiction honoree for the Massachusetts Book Award. Her memoir, Fatigue, is a #1 Amazon bestseller, and her short stories, essays, translations, and reviews have been published in Washington Post, Literary Hub, N+1, Guernica, the Yale Review, and Plowshares, among many other places. Acker has an MFA from the Bennington Writing Seminars and teaches writing and editing at Amherst College, where she directs the literary publishing internship and LitFest. She currently lives in Western Massachusetts with her husband. So, what is the book that you chose to talk about today?
I chose The Transit of Venus by Australian author Shirley Hazzard.
Great. So, when did you first hear about it? When did it fall into your hands? What was that like?
I was first told about it by a professor. It was assigned in a fiction writing class that I was taking. That we had a visiting writer in college that semester. She's deceased now, but it was Anita Shreve. Um, and when she introduced this book to our class, and she had us read it. And one of the things that she complained about the collegiate fiction that we were writing is that the material or the subject matter of our stories was banal. That was the word that she used. So, I mean, I'm sure it was. We were 19. We had nothing to write about.
Right.
Um, so she brought. This was one of the novels. This is the only book that I remember reading in that class. But it really blew me away. I mean, it had been written in 1980, and this was the late 90s, when we were reading it. And I mean, it opened up for me so many new ways of thinking about fiction and about thinking about novels, and that um, the author could deliver this like very high drama story in prose that you had to read really slowly. Usually when you think about something that's high drama, where a lot of big events happen, you think of sort of racing through it and paging through it and reading it really quickly. And this was language that you wanted to pause over every sentence and try to figure it out and say, what does this mean? And why did she think of putting it this way? And what are the consequences of what she's told us in this sentence? So it was just the sentences were so beautiful, and so full of energy and intelligence.
Right. So, do you think it gave you almost like permission to see high drama plot married with like literary sentence structure and all of that? Was it like permission to you at all?
I think so. I mean, I wasn't thinking about permission so much then. I was, we were all just so entrenched in our own experiences, and how do we turn these into stories? And at that age, many of us haven't had a lot of high drama experiences, so I'm not sure that I was thinking about it in those terms. But I think it did show me just a new path. The way that that language and drama could be paired to create an even richer experience for the reader.
Right. And I know that you really enjoy exploring a sense of place in your literary magazine and everywhere else. So, did this book influence that interest, or did it solidify it in any way?
I think it pushed me even further on that path. I mean, I didn't start The Common until I was 30. And so this was, 10 years before that at least. But even then, I was reading very much for the influence of place, and for a particular place. And Hazzard is so good on place and travel and the atmosphere, and she can just nail the feeling of a particular place, and whether it's created by the particular angle of the building or a kind of tree or whatever the details are that she chooses. um, they may not be, it's not like she spends pages telling you what a place is like. She can nail it in 3 sentences.
Right. Wow. Why do you think you're so drawn to place? Why do you think it's so important to you? Does it ground the rest of the narrative, or what do you think it is?
I think that's part of it. I do also think that there is something, quite personal in there. I grew up in a very small town in rural Maine, and I was keenly aware of what it meant to grow up in a small town, and to have many people know who you were and to stand out if you were in the least bit different. And that, this was a very rural area, and so there were some commonalities that brought us all together. But because my family, I was born in Maine, but my parents and my grandparents were not, so I spent time outside of Maine visiting my siblings who were in California, or other family who were in Canada. So I had some exposure outside of Maine, and the contrast was very evident to me. And then I took a year between high school and college to do some traveling, and I spent that year in Kenya and in Mexico, and sort of the culture shock of those encounters reinforced for me what place meant and how it could influence us.
Totally. Do you find yourself revisiting the book often?
Yeah, I mean, not often enough. I really should read it, every couple of years or something, and it hasn't been that often. I probably have read it, maybe 5 times since I first encountered it, and I'm always trying to get other people to read it with me.
Uh-huh.
So that I was able to do that during the pandemic this past
Great.
year. So we had my husband and I had an online, or like a virtual book club, with another couple, and we read a chapter or so every week. And my husband and I actually read the book out loud to each other. And this was the slowest I had ever read
Right.
this book, and just being really forced to slow down like that was such a pleasure. And he had read it before, but hadn't. But he enjoyed that process too. So we got to talk about every sentence and pause when we wanted to. And I think it took, and there's so much in this book. It's so layered, that's what makes it the sort of lifelong companion for me. Is that every time you read it, there are more layers, and even more things that you figure out, like big things in the plot. I was like, oh, I've read this book 3 times, and I didn't understand what happened until the fourth time.
Yeah. I find myself doing that with books I reread. I'm like, was I stupid not to see this before? Or is it just that layer that there you can miss it because there's so much there and all of it's good. That must have been really cool to not only read it with someone else, but read it out loud, and hearing it out loud in another voice and in your voice too. I've never done that before with a book.
I really recommend it. I mean, it was a remarkable experience. It's hard to find time for those things in daily life, but because of the pandemic, life was slower. We had more time, and it was really a wonderful excuse to be able to reread this book with that kind of care and attention. And I mean, Hazzard took a really long time to write this book and to write her following the novel after that. She was an incredibly deliberate writer, revised and revised and revised. And so reading it that slowly, I felt like I was really giving the book the attention that it deserved.
Right. Um, do you ever, I mean, when I sometimes I'm scared to reread books that affect me so much, because I'm worried that it's not going to match up, or maybe it was tied to me being young or tied to such a certain time. Did you ever think about that? Or when was the second time that you decided to read the book?
It probably so I first read it, like I said, in college, and then just a couple of years, or maybe I guess several years after that, she published another novel, which was to be the last novel that she would publish. So of course, I scooped that up and read it right away, and it won the National Book Award, or yes, that year, and so that, then I went back to The Transit of Venus as her earlier novel. So that was probably the second time, was maybe 7 or 8 years later. I don't really remember very much about that first reading experience. Like, there are some books that where you were sitting when you read certain passages, or it reminds you of the conversation that you had with such and such person. Like, there are very specific
Yeah.
life details that you can slot in. And although I remember that I had read this class in college, the experience of reading it, I don't really remember.
Mhm.
um, but I don't think I was worried about going back to it, because I don't know, I was more excited, really. I mean, just for like the richness of the experience, and to be immersed in that world again. And the more that I started to identify as a writer and try to, write my own books, the more I turned to this book for instruction and for advice, and to say, let's see how she did it, because that will guide me in how to execute something, and something I'm working on.
Right. So you sort of use it as a guide for your own writing in ways. So that's how it's influenced you, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that's one way. I mean, it's the first book, and she's the first author that I recommend to anyone. So if anyone asks me who I'm reading, or who my favorite author is, that's who I always say. It's always Shirley Hazzard. Um, and I had the opportunity to write about her, in about 2012 or 2013. So that was another opportunity to go back and read everything, and read the things that I hadn't read before. But I really do think of her as a mentor, even though we never met and she never taught me. And um, but her books themselves are, if not instructive, then at the very least inspiring.
Mhm. Um, do they leave you with a feeling that you sort of search for when you read other books? I know there's certain books that I don't know how to describe this really, but there's certain books that I read that leave me with this feeling that I wish that every other book I read captured this sort of indescribable thing that makes me just love literature. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's I think we fall into the worlds of the books that we read, and that's the spell that the writer creates. But it's certainly not that way for every book, and being inside each book is a different experience. And I think for these books, or for this book in particular, um, I mean, it is a tragedy, and so there is something about the yearning that is, and the love stories that are stretched out over the whole course of this book, that does leave you with this sort of shot in the heart feeling.
Mm.
um, and she makes it not sap you by the incredible intelligence that she brings to each observation, and to each character, and the humor too. She's often bitingly funny. And so, yeah, I mean, that there is that. And so, yeah, I look forward to that feeling. We want to be moved, right? That is why we read.
Yeah. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for being with me today. I'm so happy we had this conversation, and yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was an honor and a pleasure.
Thanks. Join the conversation at withoutbooks.com.